The body camera file begins with static and silence. A timestamp jitters, rewinds, then lands on a time that cannot be true. Headlights in the frame cut out in an instant, not fading, just gone. For a few surviving seconds, County Road 7 sits under a black mass on the ground with three lights in a perfect triangle. No beam, no shadow, no dust. Then the footage ends cleanly, like someone decided the record was finished. Marco Valdez watched it years later and understood the point wasn't what it showed, it was what it proved. Whatever came that night didn't just shut down their equipment, it edited reality after the fact. Marco Valdez didn't start with a UFO story. He started with an evidence problem. On County Road 7 outside Yuma, a routine night call produced a patrol report that didn't match the surviving footage, a vehicle that looked staged, and a gap in the timeline nobody could account for. The more Marco tried to write it off as equipment failure or panic, the more the details resisted every normal explanation. What happened out there wasn't just an encounter. It was a controlled event, recorded, interrupted, and then rewritten. The truck was white and older than the road felt. It sat at a slight angle, hazard lights off, as if it had pulled over and simply paused. The engine idled smoothly. Cool air poured from the vents when Marco opened the door, wrong in the desert night. A bottle of water in the cup holder was cold enough to sweat. The key was in the ignition. The radio played low, a station fading at the edges of reception. There was no driver, no passenger, no phone buzzing, no wallet on the seat, no blood, no broken glass, no signs of panic. The cabin looked lived in, then abandoned in the middle of a normal action. Marco filmed with his body camera out of habit, the small red indicator a comfort. Dana swept the ground with her flashlight, expecting chaotic scuffs or a trail that dissolved into scrub. Instead, she found two sets of footprints. They began at the driver's side and walked into the Sonoran brush in a straight, unbroken line. The prints were crisp and deep, too consistent for people moving through loose dust. No stumble marks, no sudden turns, no drag, no running. Just a deliberate walk away from a running vehicle into a landscape that punishes wandering. Marco followed the footprints for a short distance, keeping the truck and patrol car lights behind him. The air felt normal until he noticed what was missing. The wind did not carry sound the way it should. The space ahead felt thick, as if the desert was waiting to see how far he would step. 100 feet out, Dana froze. On the horizon, directly in the direction of the footprints, a single white point sat low and steady. Not a star, too fixed, too bright, too still. Marco lifted his flashlight, aimed it toward the glow, and clicked it on. The night answered immediately. Marco and Dana followed the two sets of footprints about 100 feet into the brush. That's when Marco noticed a single white point on the horizon, perfectly still, too steady to be a star. He raised his flashlight toward it. The light dropped, not falling like an aircraft losing altitude, but snapping straight down as if the sky had been cut open and something heavy was released. The patrol car died in the same instant. Radio, dash lights, body cams, even their watches. All of it went dark at once. Then the wind stopped. Total silence pressed in, unnatural and absolute, like the world had been muted. A massive black shape slid across the desert floor without stirring dust. Three bright lights formed a perfect triangle on its underside. It stopped about 50 feet from them, close enough that Marco could feel the air change, like static building under the skin. He tried to move and realized his body was moving slower than it should, like his muscles were pushing through thick water. Then, just as abruptly, the triangle lights flared once. The object vanished. The wind returned. The patrol car rebooted. Their cameras blinked back on like nothing had happened, except both of them were standing in a different position than they remembered, with no clear sense of how they got there. After the highway incident, Marco told himself it was finished. The abandoned truck was towed, the report was filed, the desert went back to normal, but the pattern wouldn't let go. A fixed white point on the horizon, a sudden drop, three lights forming a triangle, total electronic shutdown. A silence so absolute it felt like vacuum, then everything returning as if nothing happened. Marco started digging through old logs, dispatch notes, and quiet equipment anomaly reports from nearby jurisdictions. Most were vague, carefully worded, almost allergic to conclusions. But the coordinates kept repeating. One location appeared again and again, like a center point. Marco didn't call it obsession, he called it procedure. Dana went with him because she had felt the same pressure behind the eyes when the triangle came close, the same sensation of being watched and measured. They drove out late with paper maps and a mechanical watch. No smart navigation, no assumptions. As they reached the coordinates, the air changed. The wind fell away. Insects thinned out. And then the silence arrived, sudden and total, identical to the silence from County Road 7. A white point appeared on the horizon, perfectly steady. It brightened without flicker, as if acknowledging them. Then the triangle formed. 3 lights, clean geometry, locking into place with mechanical certainty. The moment the shape completed, every electronic device died. Dashed dark. Phones blank. Even their flashlights stuttered out, and the silence deepened. A mass of blackness resolved in front of them, low to the ground, not flying like an aircraft, but appearing as if it had stepped into the space. It stopped within 50 feet. In the faint spill of the triangle lights, a figure emerged, tall, thin, too long in the limbs, upright but wrong in its balance. Its surface caught no shine, like metal that refused to reflect. It didn't rush them. It didn't threaten them. It simply watched, with the still attention of something inspecting a sample. Marco tried to speak. The silence swallowed his voice. Then he felt pressure at the base of his skull. Not pain, not yet, but a sensation of being accessed. Dana made a choked sound beside him, her eyes going unfocused for a second, like she was receiving something without sound. The figure took one step closer, and the world dropped out. No flash, no explosion, just absence. The next moment, Marco was on his knees in sand. Wind had returned. Insects had returned. Their phones were on. The dash glowed. The triangle was gone. Marco checked his mechanical watch. The hands didn't match what he remembered. Dana stared at him, already understanding the same impossible math. They hadn't lost minutes. They had lost days. 72 hours, later confirmed by missed check-ins and timestamps that wouldn't bend to the denial. Their bodies felt used and returned. Dry mouths, bruises they couldn't explain, a fatigue too deep for one night. The MRI came back with the same detail for both of them. A perfect circular object under the brainstem, officially benign, officially nothing. But Marco had stood under a triangle that turned the world off. He had watched an alien figure step out of the dark like it owned the rules, and now something perfect and foreign sat inside him. Weeks later in Phoenix, he saw a white point hovering outside his apartment window. Steady, motionless, patient. And what frightened him most wasn't the light. It was the calm that rose in him, like recognition, like whatever had taken 72 hours had never really left. Marco left the desert. The desert didn't leave him. One night in Phoenix, a white light hovered outside his window, perfectly still, close enough to bleach the glass. No sound, no heat. Just the same pressure in his skull, the same certainty of being watched. He didn't record it. He didn't run. He only felt calm. Because he finally understood. Some people aren't witnesses, they're marked. If a silent light appeared outside your window tonight and you knew it was there for you, would you tell someone, or would you follow it? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for more sightings, missing time, and the patterns behind them. The call came in like any other. Loose cattle on Highway 16. A routine hazard in Texas hill country, the kind of thing that ends with reflective cones and irritated ranch hands. But Nina Caldwell arrived to a pasture that looked staged. 63 head of cattle stood in a ruler straight line, perfectly still, all facing the same patch of sky. No chewing, no swishing tails, no restless hooves, just a synchronized stillness that felt less like fear and more like instruction. And then her phone clock slid backward, minute by minute, as if time itself had been told to wait. Nina had been a Texas state trooper for 7 years. She trusted patterns, tire marks, heat shimmer, human lies. She knew what panic looked like and what fraud sounded like. That night, outside Medina and Bandera, she felt something worse than panic. She felt a system operating with calm confidence, using the land, the animals, and the air above them like components. Hill country was supposed to be open space and honest darkness. Instead, it became a sealed room. Bo Harrington met her near the fence line, older hands shaking with a kind of dread that didn't ask for comfort. The cattle were not scattered across the road like the dispatch said. They were gathered, arranged, aligned, as if the pasture had turned into a runway. Nina stepped into the grass, and the world grew quieter in a way she couldn't explain. Not the normal quiet of rural Texas, but an engineered quiet. Insects still existed, the breeze should have existed, yet everything that made the night feel alive was suddenly muted, as if someone had lowered the volume on nature. A faint light pulsed on the roof of the cattle barn. It was dim, almost shy, but it had a rhythm. A slow heartbeat of illumination that made the barn look temporarily unreal. The strangest part wasn't the glow, it was the shadows. Fence posts, railing, even the cattle themselves cast shadows that leaned toward the light, not away from it. The pasture's logic had flipped. Nina caught herself staring at the ground, trying to force physics to behave. When she checked her phone again, it insisted the evening was still in the 7 o'clock hour. Her patrol car's dashboard clock agreed. Her wristwatch did not. Her sense of time did not. The sky looked like after 9, the deep kind of dark that arrives when the day is fully gone. Yet the devices around her kept rewinding, as if something overhead wanted the night to last longer. The clouds began to move with purpose. They didn't drift. They rotated, tightening into a perfect circle, a clean geometry that didn't belong to weather. The ring widened and stabilized, and at the center of it hung a shape so dark it seemed to drink starlight. Not a silhouette, not a shadow, a mass. Nina felt her throat close as the air temperature dropped fast, too fast, the kind of sudden chill that doesn't come from wind. Heat fled the yard in a single breath. Her skin tightened, her fingertips went numb. On the barn roof, figures appeared, tall, thin, wrong in their proportions. They didn't move like people crossing a surface. They repositioned with minimal motion, like frames missing between moments. Their bodies were long and spare, with angles that hinted at joints but refused to confirm them. Nina couldn't settle her eyes on faces. She could only register the fact of attention. The cattle did not run. They remained lined up like witnesses. The pulsing roof light brightened and the shadows bent harder toward it, as if gravity had begun taking instructions from illumination. Nina reached for procedure, for radio calls and backup requests, for anything that would turn this into an incident with a normal ending. But the air had a different plan. The sound around her thinned. The usual world felt farther away, like she was standing inside a bubble that didn't share rules with the road behind her. Then her mind slipped, not into sleep, not into unconsciousness, into somewhere adjacent, a sideways fall into a different awareness. Nina's awareness didn't fade like sleep. It slid sideways, as if the ranch and the night were still there, only separated by a thin pane of glass. One moment she was in hill country air that smelled of dust and cattle. The next, she stood under a purple-gray sky that felt too low, lit by light that came from everywhere at once and made shadows feel unnecessary. The ground held her weight without texture. In the distance, structures rose that didn't look built so much as grown, ribbed arcs and layered shells that pulsed faintly like a system breathing. No doors, no windows, no obvious machines. Yet the place felt like a controlled environment, a sterile field designed to test one thing. Her. A pressure gathered behind her eyes. Not pain at first, but a firm hand on the back of her thoughts, turning her attention where it wanted. Memories surfaced in clean sequence, pulled forward as if selected from labeled drawers. Her first day in uniform, crash scenes, night radios, the habit of scanning for danger even when nothing was happening. It didn't feel like interrogation, it felt like measurement. The presence was immense, not in size but in certainty. Meaning arrived without words, packed tight and unfolding inside her mind. It wasn't cruel, it wasn't kind. It simply observed with a calm so complete it made human fear feel loud. Then she understood what was happening at the ranch. They weren't interested in cattle as livestock. They were interested in what cattle did to people. The protective instinct, the way a rancher guarded his herd, the way a trooper stepped between harm and someone else. That was the signal they were studying, the human reflex to shield. And Bo Harrington was the target. A fixed period, 47 days. Not a threat in the human sense, more like a clinical decision. Nina sensed that the bargaining itself was part of the process, to see who would offer themselves, to see what humans did when the danger wasn't a gun or a storm, but an intelligence that could rewrite the rules of the room. so she pushed her intent forward like a badge in the dark and offered a trade. Not pleading, structure. She presented herself as a better variable, trained observation, stress discipline, a mind conditioned to record detail. If they wanted to study protection and empathy, she could give them a cleaner sample than Bo, and she could survive the process long enough to remember it. The presence evaluated her with frightening neutrality. The pressure behind her eyes intensified, and the world seemed to pause on the edge of an answer. Agreement arrived without warmth. It felt like a latch releasing. The purple-gray sky deepened. The grown structures seemed to lean toward her awareness. She felt herself being opened, not harmed, but unfolded. Layers of memory and identity briefly exposed, scanned, and stacked back into place. For an instant, she saw a wider grid beyond this space. Moving lights in the dark, corridors of brightness connecting points like routes on a map that wasn't meant for humans. Then it snapped shut. Nina sensed the ranch again like a distant sound through walls. She understood she had only a second to leave proof in the human world, a single thread that might survive what came next. Her last act of control was practical, not heroic, forcing a message out to her department before the connection collapsed. And then the barn, the cattle, the rotating clouds, all of it fell away. Not destroyed, simply removed, as if a square of the world had been folded inward. The study began. Nina came back on Christmas morning, alone in wet grass with no tracks, like the night had been removed and put back wrong. Her body was fine, but time didn't feel straight anymore. Some moments arrived like memories from the future. She kept the job because routine was the only thing that still felt real. Officially, nothing happened. When she tried to write it down, the details slipped, turning soft and ordinary, like the truth didn't want a record. Now, on empty stretches of Highway 16, she doesn't scan for headlights. She watches the sky for seams. The scariest part wasn't what they showed her. It was how calm she felt agreeing to it. What if the bargain never ended? It just moved inside her. If your shadow ever pointed the wrong way, would you keep driving or stop and look up? Drop your theory in the comments. Subscribe for more missing time and repeating patterns. This isn't fiction, it's a warning. The blast did not sound like an explosion. It looked like one. A vertical spear of electric blue punched upward from Tango 7 and turned the snowfield into daylight for a single breath. Calvin Rhodes was already running, Brooke Anders close behind, boots biting into hard drifts as the air burned cold in their lungs. When the light collapsed, the station was gone. Not broken, not burning, not scattered into debris. The antenna mast, the wind wall, the weather dome, the fuel drums, the whole footprint of human shelter simply did not exist anymore. There was only perfectly smooth snow, unmarked and untouched, as if Tango 7 had never been built. The horizon returned to darkness, and something tall remained out there watching, too many silhouettes to count before the night swallowed them again. Calvin had worked Arctic rotations long enough to believe he understood isolation. 6 years at northern research posts teaches you what darkness does to time and nerves. 3 weeks into the deep winter shift, he and Brooke were the only two people at Tango 7, 70 miles north of the Arctic Circle, surrounded by permanent night and temperatures that hovered around -38. He had heard older crews talk about strange lights and missing hours, the kind of stories that never survived paperwork. It was not that he had never considered the possibility. It was that he refused to believe it could be real until it reached down and shut the world off around him. Midwinter at Tango 7 meant permanent night and air cold enough to sting the lungs on every breath. Calvin Rhodes was checking the magnetometer along the eastern instrument belt when the horizon changed shape. A thin, pale yellow band appeared perfectly horizontal across the east, too straight to be aurora, too steady to be weather. It did not ripple, it did not drift. It held like a line drawn with a blade. Then a second detail surfaced above it, a dark craft shape hanging in the sky, wide and silent, with no blinking markers and no engine noise. Its underside looked smooth and featureless, except for 3 faint points of light spaced with geometric intent, dim enough to feel deliberate. The station radio died into absolute silence. Not static, not fade, just nothing. as if every frequency had been shut off at the source. Inside the station, digital displays began to blink and drop, batteries collapsing from full to empty in minutes. Outside devices refused to stay on long enough to record a frame. On a perimeter camera feed, the snowfield near the north berm briefly showed a tall figure standing upright, far too slender to be a bear, too still to be a person in wind. It was roughly 20 feet from the fence line, and it pulsed in sync with the yellow band, like the light was controlling both the sky and what stood beneath it. The feed darkened and vanished. When the systems returned hours later, the band and the craft were gone, leaving only the normal Arctic horizon. But Calvin could not shake the memory of that silent object above the line, and the impossible certainty that something had been close enough to look back before the station went blind. They did not report the light or the vertical shape. Without footage, it would become a story, and stories in a government chain become assessments, evaluations, and quiet removals. They wrote only what could be described as technical anomalies and tried to return to routine, but the station felt altered, as if the walls had become thin. During a final perimeter check, Calvin saw the snow outside the wind wall and froze. The ground held prints that were not prints. Perfect circles were pressed into the snow, each nearly 4 feet wide. They were spaced apart with no trail between them, no scuff marks, no stride marks, nothing to explain travel. The circles formed a pattern that began north of the station and curved around it in a tightening spiral. Inside each circle, the snow looked polished, smooth, not compressed, not melted, as if the surface had been finished rather than stepped on. A thermal scan showed the circles were warm, not slightly warm, warm enough to stand out like fresh metal in cold air, around 40 degrees, more than 60 degrees above ambient. There was no residual radiation and no heat source below, just warmth held in perfect geometry, a signature left behind. 3 nights later, the phenomenon returned, different but more aggressive. A deep electric blue band appeared not on the horizon but higher in the sky, angled 30 degrees, stretching north to south. It began descending. The station power failed completely. Emergency systems stayed dark. Inside, temperature climbed rapidly, heat bleeding in as if something outside was radiating into the building. Through a window, Calvin saw the blue band hovering 10 feet above the snow, tall and narrow, impossibly thin yet brighter than any flare. From that light, a tall blurred form began to emerge, not walking in, but pressing through as if the air had turned into a membrane. They fled west into open snow. Behind them, Tango 7 erupted into a column of blue light that punched upward and lit the world so hard it threw sharp shadows across the tundra. In that glare, the snowfield was crowded with motionless figures, dozens, then hundreds, tall shapes spaced out as if arranged, all facing the same direction. Then the light cut off. Where the station had stood, there was nothing. No wreckage, no crater, no scattered panels, only untouched snow, smooth as a blank page. 6 months later, Calvin and Brooke returned north, 50 miles from where Tango 7 had been erased. The tundra greeted them with geometry. Circular impressions, nearly 4 feet wide, sat in ordered patterns instead of trails. Every circle held warmth through gloves, heat sealed into the snow without meltwater. From higher ground, the layout resembled a coastline map stamped into the ice. At 3:47 a.m., all electronics died at once. Cameras went black. Satellites dropped. Screens blanked. The air thickened, and a slow vibration rose through the ground, deep and rhythmic, like a massive engine idling beneath the world. Frost crept higher along fabric seams, not from wind, but from cold that felt switched on around them. Then the gold band appeared, perfectly horizontal, suspended over the tundra like a ruler line drawn across reality. Above it, a UFO resolved out of darkness, massive and silent, swallowing starlight. Its underside was smooth and curved, with recessed points of faint light arranged in precise geometry, matching the warm circles below. A thin vertical beam dropped from the craft to the band and down to the ground, clean and pale, outlining a corridor rather than lighting it. Inside the beam, the darkness looked dense, almost glassy. Snow beneath it did not stir. Along that beam, alien figures emerged, tall and narrow, long-limbed, their edges wavering as if they were not fully solid. They did not crunch through snow and left no footprints. They appeared in positions as if placed, facing Calvin's line of sight, spaced with measured intent. Some turned their heads in smooth arcs without shifting their bodies. Their surfaces were matte and dark, with faint pulses moving beneath them like light under skin, matching the vibration in the ground. The UFO lowered slightly. The beam brightened once. The warmth inside the circles intensified, and the snow within each ring looked subtly polished, as if its surface had been restructured. One figure occupied a nearer position, close enough for shallow facial contours to be visible, eyes that did not shine yet held attention like a sensor. Meaning pressed into Calvin's mind without sound, a demand shaped like a question, followed by an answer delivered as images. Tango 7 had not been destroyed. It had been removed, pulled out of a place it did not belong, a human structure interfering with layers of reality it was never meant to occupy. Calvin stopped thinking of the Arctic as empty. He began thinking of it as occupied. The lights were not a mystery flare in the distance. The prints were not a prank. The station was not destroyed. It was erased. If you ever work under permanent night and you see a perfectly horizontal band that does not ripple, or you find warm circles pressed into snow with no trail between them, do not assume you are alone. Assume you are standing near the spaces between, and that something tall is already facing your direction, waiting to see if you look back. Night in the Rockies. The cab is the only warm box of light for miles. Jackson grips the wheel as the road ahead looks edited, like someone erased the depth from the world and left only a flat strip of asphalt in its place. The beams from his truck still blaze, yet they stop short in midair, as if the darkness has weight. Then a pressure settles over the roof, not wind, not weather, something vast and deliberate. The engine sound thins into a hollow hum, every gauge steady but meaningless, and the air inside the cab turns metallic and sharp. Jackson lifts his eyes to the windshield and realizes he is not approaching the anomaly. It is approaching him. October 2019, Colorado. The stretch from Grand Junction toward Gunnison is the kind of road that feels empty even when you are not alone. Just black mountains, cold air, and the hum of a diesel engine trying to keep you anchored to reality. Jackson had 15 years behind the wheel. He knew the difference between fear and imagination. That night, the road taught him a third thing. The line ran parallel to the highway, bright but sourceless, not blinking like aircraft lights, not shimmering like reflection, just a clean glowing stroke suspended in open air. Jackson slowed. Mary leaned forward, trying to make sense of it, trying to film it. The phone struggled to lock focus, hunting the darkness, refusing the line like it did not want to be recorded. Then the headlights failed in the strangest way. The bulbs still burned. The dashboard still glowed, but the beam would not reach the road. It stacked up in front of the grill, flat and useless, as if the night had turned solid. The truck shuddered and died. A hard cut of silence. No wind through mirrors, no engine vibration, just their breathing. Seconds later, everything returned at once. Engine, radio, normal light. Jackson drove on, trying to laugh it off. 10 minutes later, Mary checked the GPS. Same coordinates, same mile marker, same distance to Gunnison, still locked at 38 to 40 miles like the road had reset. They passed signs they had already passed. They saw a reflector that felt familiar, then impossible. Jackson kept driving anyway, because stopping made it feel worse. The line returned. This time it did not float beside the road. It stretched across the highway ahead, widening into a pale tear in the dark. The air around it looked wrong, like heat shimmer without heat. Jackson did the only thing his instincts could agree on. He put his foot down and drove straight through. The moment the truck crossed the seam, the pressure in their ears released. The GPS jumped forward. The next sign finally changed. The road began behaving like a road again. 3 months later, Jackson had to take Highway 50 again, daylight this time, alone. He told himself daylight meant safety. It did not. Midway through the run, he saw a woman in a white dress standing on the shoulder. No coat, no bag, no car nearby. Just her, perfectly still as if placed there. As he approached, the details broke. Her eyes sat too far apart. Her mouth looked too wide. Her skin had the waxy calm of a store mannequin trying to imitate a human being. Jackson stared, caught between braking and fleeing. The truck passed her, and she turned to follow him. Not like a person, like a display on a rotating stand, a smooth mechanical pivot that kept her face tracking the cab until Jackson could no longer see her in the mirror. Then Jackson felt it, that prickling certainty you get when you are being measured. Not watched casually, watched with purpose. A thought slid in, quiet and cold, not in words, but in meaning. We know you. Jackson told himself it was just a weird roadside moment. Then his CB radio hissed, one thin line of static, clean and steady, like a tone. No voice, no chatter, just a single frequency that didn't belong. A mile later, the world started to thin out. Not visually. Colorado still looked like Colorado, but sound became too clean. The tire noise dulled, like someone lowered the volume on the universe. Even the vibration through the wheel felt filtered. Jackson glanced at the clock. The digits looked normal, but the seconds didn't tick. So much as hold, like time was deciding whether to move. Then his headlights did something impossible in broad daylight. They were on. Bright, normal, and yet the beam hit the air ahead and stopped, flattened against an invisible surface just beyond the hood, as if the light couldn't move forward. Jackson whispered, "No." He eased off the gas, instinct, then tried to correct back into the lane. The steering didn't resist, it wasn't stiff. It felt like the road had become a track and the truck was no longer his. And then the engine shut down, not a cough, not a sputter, a clean surgical cut. RPM dropped to 0, the hum vanished. The cab became a sealed box of silence. He coasted to the shoulder, hands shaking, trying the ignition. Nothing. The dash stayed lit, but the lights looked wrong, too steady, too perfect, like a screenshot of a dashboard rather than a living system. Jackson looked down at his phone on the seat. The screen was awake. One word sat there as if it had always been waiting. Stay. He didn't remember unlocking it. He didn't remember anyone typing it. And then he saw the shadow. It wasn't cast by clouds. It didn't match the sun's angle. It slid over the road in a shape that shouldn't exist. A triangle, wide enough to swallow his rig. Jackson forced himself to look up. A black triangular craft hung above Highway 50, low, silent, with 3 faint points of light at its corners. No seams, no detail. It didn't reflect sunlight so much as refuse it. The air changed, cold pressure behind the eyes, a metallic bite like ozone. From the center underside, something unfolded. Not a spotlight, but a hard-edged column of pale light, as straight as a doorway drawn into the air. Dust stopped drifting, and inside that column a figure resolved, tall, thin, with limbs that bent the wrong way, joints stacked where joints shouldn't be. It didn't walk down. It simply became present on the asphalt as if distance had been folded. Jackson's throat locked. He couldn't scream. Then the contact arrived, not through sound, but straight into his head, sharp and emotionless. Seen. A second pulse followed. Images that weren't his choice. The white hovering line from months ago, the GPS loop, the moment reality tore across the road. And then, the woman in the white dress, now not standing at the shoulder, but standing inside his memory like a bookmark. The same wrong face, the same fixed attention. Another thought pressed in, colder. Watcher, lure, alignment confirmed. The figure lifted a long hand and touched the truck's window. The fingers were too long, too many bends. The gesture wasn't threatening, it was testing, like learning what glass is. Jackson tried to move, his body didn't respond. Not paralysis, something worse. Like his impulse had nowhere to go. Then the final thought landed, heavy as a verdict. Marked, continued. Sound snapped back, wind, distant traffic. The creak of the cab, the column of light was gone. The triangle was gone. The phone screen returned to normal like it had never shown anything. The engine restarted by itself. Jackson sat there breathing hard, staring at empty sky, knowing the scariest part wasn't the shutdown. It was how precisely it had all been timed. As if the roadside woman wasn't random, she was a trigger, a sign that the next stage had begun. That night he checked his dashcam. The file list jumped from 2:13 p.m. to 2:29 p.m., 16 minutes missing. The gap wasn't a corrupted file. It was cleanly removed, as if somebody had highlighted a strip of time and cut it out. 2 days later, a plain envelope appeared in his mailbox. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a single photo, taken from high above Highway 50 in daylight, his rig on the shoulder, and above it, unmistakable, the black triangle hanging perfectly centered. At the bottom, one line, "You were seen." And Jackson finally understood what the woman's stare had been. Not curiosity, not warning, a handoff. Jackson says the worst part wasn't the craft. It was the feeling that Highway 50 had turned into a checkpoint and he'd been processed. Because you can explain a blackout, you can explain a GPS loop, but you can't explain a photo taken from above your truck when you never saw anything up there. So tell me, if it happened to you, would you keep driving or would you vanish first? At 2:03 a.m., the Mojave is so quiet that the cruiser engine feels loud. Aiden steps out, boots crunching grit, and sees the man standing at the shoulder like someone paused mid-thought. No jacket, no fear, just stillness. Then Aiden notices the mark on the man's wrist, a perfect circle, smooth as glass, like the skin forgot how to heal normally. The man whispers without blinking. They are still watching. Aiden turns his flashlight toward the desert. A white sphere lifts off the sand behind him, silent, patient, and close enough that the beam of his light dies against it, like the night itself is being turned off. Aiden used to think night patrol was about drunk drivers and broken-down cars. Out here in the Mojave's dead air, the highway feels like a test range for something that doesn't need permission. And the strangest part is how calm it all tries to look, right up until it decides you've noticed. October 9th, just after midnight. Near the Zayax turnoff, Aiden catches a lone white sphere the size of a basketball hovering 1 meter above the sand. No flicker, no heat, no shadow. It hangs there with the calm of something that doesn't need air to stay up. Miguel raises his phone and snaps 3 shots. The screen previews normal road, normal cruiser, normal desert. But every image that includes the sphere comes back as a solid black rectangle, like the camera is being told to forget that specific patch of space. Aiden sweeps it with his flashlight. The beam stops in midair, clean and absolute, as if it strikes a glass wall. No reflection, no flare, no spill on the sand. Just a hard cutoff that makes Aiden's stomach drop, because light is not supposed to be negotiable. He steps closer and reaches out. The sphere shifts 3 meters sideways in a blink. No wind up, no blur, no sound. Not dodging in panic. Correcting position, as if it's keeping a measured gap between them on purpose. Miguel circles to the left, trying to box it in. The sphere subtly rotates, always presenting the same face toward them, and Aiden realizes with a quiet jolt that it's not merely hovering, it's tracking, watching. Sergeant Kellerman arrives, takes one look, and goes still. He doesn't radio it in, he doesn't joke, he just tells them to write it down, keep it clinical, and get back on patrol. As they pull away, Aiden checks the mirrors until his eyes ache. The shoulder is empty again. The desert is ordinary again. But the silence inside the cruiser feels staged, like the night has been reset. And Aiden can't shake the certainty that whatever stood there a moment ago now knows exactly what their headlights look like when they turn back. 2 weeks of quiet, then October 23rd on Route 127. Aiden and Miguel spot the same white sphere hovering in the middle of the lane, shin high, perfectly still. They stop short and approach. At 10 feet, it slides backward at the exact pace they advance, keeping the distance like it's enforcing a rule. Miguel circles wide to flank it, and the sphere rotates to face him, calm and deliberate. Aiden raises his flashlight. The beam hits an invisible barrier again, but this time the cutoff curves, leaving a thin crescent of light hanging in midair like the road is being bent. Miguel mutters, his ears feel pressurized. The sphere starts to pulse in a slow rhythm. Aiden tastes metal. The radio turns to static, and beneath it comes a brief, layered tone that feels too close to the skull. They step back. The sphere holds for one last beat, then shoots straight up and vanishes. The radio clears. The night sound returns, and Aiden realizes the shift. It didn't just appear. It reacted. November 4th. Aiden keeps the cruiser centered on the lane lines while Miguel scans the shoulders for stranded drivers and deer eyeshine. The Mojave looks empty in the way deserts always lie, like the land is holding back a secret. Aiden notices the first change in the sound, not the sight. The engine hum becomes slightly thinner, like a note losing its depth. Then the cabin pressure feels off, a subtle squeeze behind the ribs, as if the air has weight. The dash lights dim, slow at first, then all at once. The radio drops into silence. The speedometer needle falls as the engine stutters once and dies completely. For a heartbeat, they are just rolling forward on momentum, Two men inside a dead car with no signal, no backup nearby, and too much darkness ahead. Miguel taps the console, then the radio mic, then swears under his breath. No response, no static, nothing. Ahead, the road should be dark. It is not. Three white spheres rise from behind the ridgeline like moons lifting from the ground. Each one is enormous, silent, and wrong. They move in a perfect triangle, slowing without any sense of braking, stopping at a distance that feels chosen with care. Miguel lifts his phone. The screen stays awake. The camera opens. The preview looks normal for a split second, then every frame turns blank, as if the lens is staring into a hole the sensor cannot translate. Aiden steps out. The air tastes metallic. A low vibration presses into his chest and teeth, not loud, not even really a sound, more like pressure that pulses in patterns. One sphere drifts forward and lowers until it hangs in front of the cruiser's hood. Its surface shifts. Geometric forms crawl under the skin, sliding like liquid metal made of light. Aiden feels an urge to look away, but his eyes refuse. His hand rests on his holster. It feels pointless, like a ritual object, not a tool. Miguel whispers that it is reading them. The nearest sphere stops moving. The vibration deepens, then collapses abruptly, as if a scan has finished and the machine has decided it has what it came for. The other two spheres lift in perfect timing. All three shoot straight up, faster than anything with mass should move, and vanish into the black. The cruiser jolts back to life. Engine on. Dash bright. Radio hiss returns like breath after a long hold. They do not speak for a moment. Aiden stares at the road, waiting for the next impossible thing to announce itself. Miguel keeps looking at the phone as if it might suddenly remember what it saw. Aiden turns the car around to head back toward the last marker. He tells himself it is procedure, that you do not keep driving through a place where the world can be switched off. Then the headlights catch a figure on the shoulder. A man standing perfectly still. Just a t-shirt and jeans in the cold. No bag, no vehicle, no reflective gear. He is positioned too neatly, like someone placed him there rather than someone who walked there. Aiden slows to a crawl. The man does not wave, does not flinch. He watches the cruiser approach with a face that seems unfinished, eyes focused but empty, like he is awake inside a dream that belongs to someone else. Aiden lowers the window. The desert air rushes in, sharper now, carrying a faint ozone bite. The man's lips move, his voice is quiet and flat, every word spaced evenly, like a recording trying to sound human. They are still watching. Aiden reaches for the door handle. The cabin lights flicker once. The radio pops with a short burst of static that sounds almost like a syllable. Aiden looks back at the shoulder. The man is gone. No footsteps in the sand. No direction he could have moved fast enough. Just emptiness where a living person should not be able to vanish. And then a few yards ahead, hovering at waist height in the headlight beam, a small white sphere appears. It hangs there perfectly still, not pulsing, not drifting, simply present, like a period at the end of a sentence. Miguel does not move. Aiden cannot blink. The sphere shifts sideways in a single instant, 3 meters, no glide, no arc, no inertia, like it is demonstrating a rule of its own physics. Aiden's radio hisses again, and for the smallest moment, he thinks he hears a word inside the noise, not a voice through the speaker, a word inside his head. Return. Aiden puts the car in drive and rolls forward, slow, controlled, eyes fixed on the road. Behind them, the desert stays silent, as if it is listening to how well they obey. Aiden never files the full report. He keeps one detail to himself, the word that wasn't on the radio but inside his skull. Return. Miguel transfers to day shift. Aiden stays on nights, memorizing mile markers, watching the shoulders, waiting for the next quiet placement of something that does not belong on a human road. If you were Aiden, would you go back to that stretch on purpose, just once, to see what answers the dark gives you? Clint kills the tractor lights and the field disappears, just a black ocean of stubble and wind. Then the radio screams and cuts dead, and something presses on his chest like the sky just got heavier. A pale ring floats ahead, too clean, too round, hanging 20 stories above his land like it's measuring the place. The tractor keeps running until it doesn't. Not a stall, not a sputter, just silence, like a switch flipped on the whole world. Clint Hargrove has worked the same 480 acres his grandfather broke in back in 1947. After harvest, the nights get wide and empty, and you start hearing your own thoughts over the engine. He never believed in signs. But that October, the land began answering back, through the radio, through the air, through the dirt itself, like something overhead had decided the field was a page worth reading. Second week of October 2021, after harvest. Clint Hargrove is easing his tractor toward the shed when the radio warps into a hard metallic hiss. At the same instant, a strange pressure clamps his chest, like the air itself is charged. Out over the cut rows, a pale circular object hangs about 200 feet up. Smooth, perfectly round, glowing white without a beam. The wind dies. The field feels muted, like sound has been turned down. Clint tries the ignition. Nothing. No click, no cough. The dash goes dead, as if the machine has been unplugged from the world. The object descends, straight down, until it's hovering 10 feet above the soil. Beneath it, the ground shifts to a rusty orange and shimmers with heat. Vapor rising, no flames, just an ozone tang. The glow parts and 3 small figures step out, around 4.5 feet tall, thin, long-armed, with oversized smooth heads and no clear facial features from where he's frozen in the cab. They pause in a neat line, motionless, like they're waiting for a reading to finish. One of them turns its head slightly. Clint feels instantly noticed. A single harsh crackle snaps from the radio, though it's switched off. Then the light cuts out. The figures vanish. The disc is gone. Darkness returns to normal, and without him touching the key, the tractor starts itself. Headlights flaring back on, the radio resuming mid-song, like the night never skipped a beat. At sunrise, Clint finds the spot fast because it isn't burned. It's too clean. A 30-foot circle of soil has turned black and slick, faintly reflective like glass. No ash, no smoke, just a thin ozone bite that shouldn't still be there. He takes photos. Every shot looks fine until he zooms. The edge of the ring won't stay sharp, like the camera can't agree on what it's seeing. He jars a sample and shows it to Dr. Ellen Moss. She studies it, then goes quiet. Extreme heat. Hot enough to fuse silica, and it cooled fast. Clint asks, "Lightning?" Ellen shakes her head. "Lightning isn't this even. It doesn't make a perfect ring." That night he returns alone. The circle looks darker than the surrounding field, like it's swallowing starlight. When he steps near the edge, the insects don't quiet naturally. They cut off too suddenly, like sound hit an invisible boundary. Then the pressure comes back in his chest. Over the ring, a pale curve appears for a blink, like the rim of something huge sliding through air that isn't air. Clint backs away slow, eyes locked on that black circle, certain of one thing: whatever made it plans to come back. That night, the circle turns into a silence trap. Crickets don't fade, they cut out the instant he steps over an invisible threshold. Wind still moves the tree line, but not the air above the ring. His own breathing feels too loud, too close, like the sound is trapped in his ribcage. He tells himself it's nerves, a trick of attention, so he tries to leave proof. He scoops soil into labeled jars, seals the lids tight, and locks them in the barn. He scribbles the date and time on masking tape, presses it down hard. In the morning, the lids are loosened, not all of them, just 2, and one label is smeared as if a damp thumb dragged across the ink. Clint stands there staring at the jars, feeling the same pressure he felt in the field, except now it's inside his house. That's when he stops using his phone. He digs out an old mini DV camcorder, the kind that doesn't need a signal, the kind nobody can remote into. He charges the battery, checks the tape, and tells himself he'll do one clean recording and be done. He goes out after midnight. He parks with headlights facing away, keeps the truck door open like an escape hatch, and walks in slow, deliberate steps, camcorder tucked tight against his chest. At the ring's edge, his chest pressure returns. Sharp, electrical, like standing too close to a transformer. He steps over the boundary, and the world drops out. No insects, no wind, no far-off highway hum. Just a vacuum of sound so complete his ears start to ring from the absence. He raises the camcorder. Through the viewfinder, the field looks slightly flattened. Depth feels off, like the circle is a thin overlay placed on top of the land. Then his truck radio starts tearing with static, loud enough to hear from the field. Above the ring, the starlight seems to thin, like something is hanging there that the sky refuses to outline. A pale object sits low, and the weirdest part is the light. It doesn't throw shadows outward. Shadows seem to lean toward it, as if the rules are reversed. Then 3 small figures appear beneath it, not walking in, just there, placed on the ground. Thin bodies, long arms, smooth round heads, no clear features from Clint's distance. They don't look at him. They spread out with perfect spacing and press their hands to the soil along the ring. Tap, faint glow, gone. Tap, faint glow, gone, like they're checking a circuit. And then Clint notices something else through the lens. Faint straight lines, barely visible, crossing the field beyond the circle. A grid, subtle as a watermark. The ring is just one node in it. His mouth goes dry. His hands tighten on the camcorder. A stalk snaps under his boot. All 3 figures stop at once and pivot toward him with the same smooth, mechanical precision. Clint tries to lift his flashlight, clicks it on, and the beam dies clean at the ring's edge, as if light itself can't cross. The pressure in his chest climbs into his skull. He feels something brush the inside of his thoughts. Not words, not a voice, just a cold sense of being indexed. Like his name has been copied into a ledger he'll never see. One figure takes a slow step toward him. Clint tries to back up and realizes his feet are moving a half beat late, like his body is lagging behind his decision. He stumbles, catches himself, and the camcorder tilts, just enough to catch the underside of the object. The light shifts. For a split second, the smooth surface isn't smooth at all. It's segmented, panel lines that don't meet at right angles, patterns that refuse to settle in his eyes. Then everything ends at once. The object lifts, the figures vanish, crickets resume mid-song like someone hit play. Clint looks at his watch. The time is wrong, backward by minutes he can't account for. In the distance, his truck coughs like it's trying to start, then stops, repeating with the same timing like a recording being practiced. He runs, slams the door, starts the engine normally, and drives off, shaking so hard his teeth click. At sunrise, the circle is still there, unchanged, except for 3 shallow impressions just inside the boundary, evenly spaced, like markers. He rewinds the tape. The footage is mostly normal. His boots, the ring, the sudden silence. But the moment the figures appear, the image degrades into a clean, deliberate blur, as if the camera is being told what it's allowed to keep. Except for one thing. A single frame where the grid lines are visible, unmistakable. Clint locks the tape in his fireproof safe, not because he's afraid people won't believe him, but because he's starting to believe the circle isn't just on his land anymore, it's on him. And once you're on the list, the sky doesn't need to come down again. It can just wait. Clint doesn't release the footage. He locks it away, because the ring doesn't care about proof. It keeps returning. Same pressure in his chest, same radio hiss, and new faint lines in the soil like a grid being rebuilt. Nothing attacks him, nothing threatens him. It just checks, marks, and leaves. His last note is simple. One night at the ring's edge, the stars looked wrong. For a second, like the sky blinked. So if you found a perfect circle where the world goes quiet, would you step in? Grant McCarthy thought he understood the Alaskan sky. Then the aurora stopped behaving like the aurora. A pale band froze rigid in midair, and inside it a perfect white line appeared, thin, steady, and too precise to be natural. In the same moment, the Twin Otter's radios fell into absolute silence. Digital systems began lying, and the shape in the sky started moving as if it could read the aircraft. This is not a story about chasing UFOs. It is about a repeating pattern that interacts with an aircraft like a controlled experiment. Communications cut out without static. Digital avionics drift into absurd errors, while analog instruments remain steady. A geometric form appears inside the aurora, rotates with mechanical smoothness, and then begins to match the plane's movement with unnerving precision. Grant McCarthy, 41, was trained to trust procedure, instruments, and weather models. His co-pilot, Renee Voss, carried the same discipline. Their route from Fairbanks to Barrow was familiar, remote, and usually uneventful. What happened on 2 separate flights suggested something else lived in that corridor, something capable of touching a machine in midair and leaving physical proof behind. Early February, the Twin Otter lifted from Fairbanks and flew north without issue for hours. Then the aurora formed ahead and stopped behaving like the aurora. A long east-west band of light froze rigid in mid-motion. Inside that frozen curtain, a single white line appeared, razor straight, pencil thin, bright enough to force a squint. It held perfectly still, too precise to feel natural. The cockpit failed in a way that felt selective. Radios dropped into absolute silence, primary and backup, with no static. GPS flickered and began reporting impossible jumps, altitude numbers spiking and collapsing, while analog dials stayed calm. Ahead, the white line rotated with mechanical smoothness, tilted slightly, corrected, then appeared closer in sudden steps, as if its distance updated between blinks. It split into 3 identical lines and arranged into a perfect triangle, point up, centered in the forward view. When Grant altered heading, the triangle rotated to stay aligned with the nose. When he adjusted altitude, it matched the change with exact timing. It was tracking. A harsh burst of static snapped through the headset, and a monotone male voice issued a directive to maintain heading and not deviate. The triangle flared once in intense white and vanished. The Aurora resumed normal motion. Radios returned, GPS stabilized. Yet the aircraft recorded a communications loss the ground logs did not acknowledge. After landing at Barrow, the proof was on the airframe. Thick frost coated both wings, far heavier than expected, and a faint scorched discoloration marked the nose, which stayed warm long after shutdown. The official inspection found no shorts, no clear damage, no mechanical explanation. On paper, it became an unexplained malfunction with possible Aurora interference. In the cockpit, it remained something else. Grant could not ignore how selective it had been. Radio silence without noise, digital lies without analog failure, geometry that behaved like a guided instrument rather than atmospheric light. In early March, Grant and Renee flew the same corridor again with no passengers. A single white point appeared ahead, then blinked out. The radio cracked once, and the same monotone voice returned, issuing a calm directive that tried to steer them by command rather than by control tower procedure. The temperature in the cockpit dropped rapidly. Frost crept along the windshield edges. GPS flickered. The white point returned as a line, then divided into 3, forming the triangle again, as the Aurora seemed to fade away behind it. The triangle held its position relative to the aircraft like a lock-on symbol, matching heading and altitude changes with exact timing. Then the aircraft's behavior shifted from abnormal to impossible. It dipped hard, then surged into a steep climb driven by full power without pilot input. The yoke locked. At 14,200 feet, the climb stopped instantly, and the aircraft held as if pinned in place, engines settling into idle without the expected fall. The triangle moved closer, and the pilots realized it was not the object. It was an outline, edges of something larger, dark, massive, silent, filling the forward view and erasing depth. Control returned violently during a sudden drop. At lower altitude, the aircraft stabilized and the dark mass disappeared. After landing, the physical marks were clearer. Frost again clung to wings. The nose discoloration remained. Beneath the fuselage, 3 parallel burn lines were scored into the paint, evenly spaced, precise as measurement marks. This time, the response did not stay inside rumor and logbooks. FAA investigator Patricia Keller confirmed the physical evidence aligned with the crew's timeline. The scorch patterns suggested thermal exposure rather than scraping, chemicals, or maintenance error. The burn lines under the belly were too uniform to be random damage, and the paint showed signs of heat applied in narrow bands. The frost samples showed unusual crystalline structure, closer to conditions the aircraft had not actually flown through. Even the heat on the nose after shutdown behaved wrong, lingering like the metal had absorbed energy and refused to give it back. What made it worse was the system-like behavior. The failures were selective, almost surgical. Radios went silent without the messy signature of interference. Digital systems became unreliable in clusters, while the analog instruments stayed stable enough to keep the crew alive. The geometry appeared inside the Aurora, then acted like a tracking tool, rotating to remain aligned with the aircraft's nose and copying altitude changes as if it was reading a live stream of the plane's state. That suggested intent, or at least a process that responded to control inputs. Grant began searching for precedent. He found a declassified military report from the 1980s describing a strikingly similar event over the North Slope. communications loss without conventional noise, navigation anomalies, and heat-related discoloration on aircraft surfaces. Different decade, different crew, same region, same fingerprint. The corridor was not producing a new anomaly. It was repeating an old one. That changed how the story felt. It was no longer a strange night with a strange light. It became a long-running pattern embedded in that airspace. A phenomenon that could reach into a cockpit systems, reduce a modern aircraft to partial blindness, then present a geometric form that behaved with the calm precision of machinery. It did not need to chase the plane. It only needed to establish rules, force compliance, and then release control once the demonstration was complete. The official conclusion remained conservative. Unknown aerial phenomenon, possible environmental influence, unexplained equipment malfunction. The words were safe because they did not claim more than regulators could prove. Operationally, the response spoke louder. Grant McCarthy and Renee Voss were reassigned to southern routes. The Fairbanks to Barrow corridor became a place their company preferred not to test again, not because they could define the threat, but because the threat had already proven it could touch an aircraft and leave marks that survived the flight. For Grant, the last meaning was personal and cold. That route felt claimed. Not claimed by a nation or a weather system, but claimed by an intelligence or mechanism that could impose behavior on machines in midair. The frost was a signature. The heat scars were a signature. The 3 burn lines were a signature. A way of saying contact happened, and contact could happen again. Grant never saw the lines again, but the pattern stayed. He kept flying, but he watched the aurora differently, scanning for the moment it might freeze, for the moment a perfect straightness might appear, where nature should only ripple. When other pilots mentioned radios going dead with no static, GPS jumping while analog stayed calm, sudden frost that made no sense, or heat scars on metal, Grant listened because he recognized the structure behind it. Now it turns to you. What fits better? Classified testing, rare atmospheric physics, or an intelligence imposing rules on machines in midair? If the sky signaled tomorrow, would you recognize a pattern or explain it away until it fades? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for new sightings, anomalous energy readings, and the repeating patterns hiding in plain sight. This isn't just a story, it's a warning. The truck lifted without a sound. No roar, no dust blast, no engine strain. It rose like the desert had forgotten gravity, turning slowly as if something above it was inspecting every panel and bolt. For a few seconds it hung there, suspended in perfect silence, the headlights pointing into empty air. Then it dropped. Metal folded on impact, glass burst. The frame collapsed into itself in a way that felt ordinary only after you ignored the impossible part. Across the sand, a clean spherical darkness had hovered moments earlier, like a piece of the night sky had been cut out and lowered toward the ground. And now that void was gone, leaving only a ruined vehicle, frost forming where the desert should have been warm, and instruments that recorded a 90-second blackout as if reality had blinked. That was not the first time Cole Maddox saw it. It was the moment he realized it had been watching back. Cole Maddox had heard the stories the way everyone on the range heard them. A light too clean to be a flare. A blackout that lasted just long enough to make you doubt your own memory. A patch of desert that turned cold for no reason anyone could name. People laughed about it in daylight and went quiet about it at night. It was not that Cole had never considered it. He just refused to believe it could happen to him. The range was built for tests and measurements, not for things that slipped past both. Cole trusted routines and systems. If something strange appeared, there would be a report, a weather note, a maintenance explanation. Then it happened. And after that, the hardest part was not what he saw, but how impossible it became to keep pretending it was nothing. March 14, 2019, 2:47 a.m. Cole patrols the northern edge near the red zone boundary. Without warning, the Humvee loses all power, instant and total, as if the circuit of the world has been opened. The radio becomes pure static. A quarter-mile away, a pale blue-white column appears, perfectly straight from sky to ground. It makes no sound and casts no spill light, visible as a shape rather than illumination. Cole counts the seconds, staying awake, staying present, measuring the event by will alone. At 90 seconds, the column vanishes instantly. In the same breath, the Humvee returns to life, as if the shutdown never happened. Back at base, the logs confirm the part that should not be possible. A radar blackout occurred for the same 90 seconds within 3 miles of his location. Thermal sensors recorded a localized 40-degree drop. GPS data shows his vehicle as perfectly stationary for the full window, even though his mind insists he was alert and counting. The incident leaves no debris, no crater, no visible burn. It leaves only synchronized absence across multiple systems, like a controlled field switching on and off. 2 weeks later, Cole meets Sienna Torres at the radar center supporting the Goldwater Range. She has been tracking voids, clean geometric holes cut out of radar returns, not noise and not malfunction. These voids move in straight lines toward the northeast at roughly 400 miles per hour, consistent enough to plot, consistent enough to predict. Reports label them atmospheric anomalies, but the voids behave like objects with boundaries. Cole and Sienna compare timelines and find overlaps. The blue-white columns appear near major test sites, Yuma, Goldwater Range, and the Sonoran Desert corridors. Close to those windows, other anomalies cluster: navigation reversals, orientation errors, instruments briefly reporting the world flipped. The pattern suggests the void is not simply a blind spot. It is an active suppression zone that degrades detection and destabilizes electronics inside its radius. They build an informal group, people who have touched the same edge from different angles. Marcus Sanders, a pilot who has felt airborne systems go dark near a void. Sarah Kelly, maintenance, who can confirm the faults do not match normal failure chains and sometimes align with magnetic irregularities. David Torres, an environmental contractor tracking electromagnetic spikes in places the range rarely discusses. None of them can name the phenomenon. All of them agree on the same conclusion: it behaves as if it is applied deliberately. They build a network, not to chase a craft, but to catch the signature in motion. Multiple EM sensors, synchronized timestamps, redundant recorders, and layered observation points designed to survive the same interference that keeps erasing the middle of events. The goal is simple. If a void forms again, they want the moment it begins, the moment it peaks, and the moment it collapses, all measured from more than one angle. On April 4th, 2019, the network triggers. A void is forming. Sanders tracks from a helicopter and describes it as a perfect dark region, as if a circle has been cut out of the night sky. It is not shadow, it is absence, a boundary so clean it looks manufactured. As he closes to roughly 200 yards, the helicopter loses power for 20 seconds. The failure is immediate, complete, and then it returns just as cleanly, proving proximity matters and proving the void is not passive. Cole approaches on the ground. The temperature drops rapidly as he enters the field, cold enough that frost forms on fabric in a desert night. The air feels dense, the silence pressed, as if sound itself has to push harder to exist. Ahead, the pale blue-white column appears again, the same color as the March event, perfectly straight, touching down near the void center. The ground begins to change where the column meets the sand. It does not scatter or burn, it reorganizes. Grains lock into repeating geometry, crystalline facets forming patterns that look engineered rather than natural, as if material is being forced into structure by an invisible rule. Then the truck lifts. No roar, no dust blast, no engine scream. It rises slowly in silence, rotates as if examined, and hangs for a brief interval that makes the desert feel like a laboratory. The moment is long enough to register the impossibility, then short enough to offer no control. The truck drops and is destroyed on impact. Above, the spherical void collapses in segmented folds, like geometric panels closing inward. It compresses, fractures into orderly sections, then disappears. The sky returns to normal immediately, leaving behind only the altered ground, the destroyed vehicle, and the data trail that proves a field was present. The event does not feel like an accident. It feels like demonstration. Months later, after the group has accumulated evidence and synchronized records, a message arrives that leads them to a meeting site. They go together. A smaller spherical void forms directly overhead, and the blue-white column descends. A tall, thin, humanoid figure emerges briefly, observed rather than approached, present for only seconds, long enough to confirm that the phenomenon is not only a field, but an operator. When it vanishes, the warning arrives in the only form that matters, a choice framed as consequence. Continue investigating and accept the risk of exposure and destabilization, or accept that some answers carry weight they are not ready to hold. The group understands the real shift. They are not watching a mystery from a distance anymore. The mystery has looked back and responded. They did not go public, not because the evidence was weak, but because the pattern was clear. Every time the phenomenon appeared, detection failed cleanly, systems went blind in a controlled radius, and time behaved like something that could be edited. Attention did not produce clarity, it produced response. So they split the files, duplicated the logs, and kept watching from farther out, treating the desert like a perimeter rather than a stage. What stays with Cole is not the lights or the void. It is the feeling of being measured. The truck lift was not a mistake. The origami collapse was not random. It looked like a sequence completing itself, a demonstration that could be repeated whenever the operator chose. The warning that followed did not demand silence. It offered a trade, curiosity in exchange for exposure. And now the question lands on you in a different way. If the most instrumented range on Earth can be turned blind for 90 seconds, what happens in places with no sensors at all? If a perfect hole can be cut out of radar, what else can be cut out and made to look like it never existed? If you ever see a column of blue-white light that does not illuminate anything, or a patch of sky that looks like absence instead of darkness, do not assume you are the only observer. Assume you have been noticed. Erin Massey had flown Wichita to Hays so many times she could picture the route with her eyes closed. Same towers, same farmhouse lights, same quiet Kansas night that made you forget the world was big. At 10:39 p.m. she saw a light dead ahead, sitting exactly on her flight path. Too steady, too yellow, too fixed. Wichita Center said the radar was clean, no traffic, no towers at her altitude, nothing. She eased 5 degrees north to go around it. The light stayed centered in her windshield. She corrected again. It stayed centered, like it wasn't in the sky, like it was locked onto her. At a mile out, the single light split into 7, arranged in a perfect circle, rotating slowly around a core of darkness, darker than the night itself. Her radio drowned in static. The engine hiccuped once, then again, like it was choking on air that wasn't air. The 7 lights stopped rotating at the same time, and Erin understood, with a cold certainty that hit her stomach before her mind could catch up. They weren't floating there. They were waiting. A Cessna 172 is a simple aircraft, and Kansas is a simple sky. That is why the anomaly hit so hard. The light did not blink like aviation lights, did not drift like a star, and did not show on radar. It behaved as if it knew her route, her altitude, her decisions. Erin did not want to believe it was intentional, but the feeling grew anyway. Something was choosing her. Erin saw a dull yellow light dead ahead at her exact altitude. It didn't blink, didn't drift, and Wichita Center saw nothing on radar. She turned 5 degrees north to give it space. The light stayed centered in her windscreen. She turned again, still centered, like it was matching her. At 2 miles, it resolved into 7 lights in a perfect circle, rotating slowly around a center darker than the night sky, a solid disc-shaped void swallowing starlight. Her radio drowned in heavy static. Her engine coughed once, then twice. Gauges stayed normal. The 7 lights stopped rotating in the same instant, and the cockpit flooded with harsh yellow, like daylight with no shadows. Then the engine simply stopped. Clean. Total. She pushed the nose down to glide and ran the restart checklist, but nothing responded. The 7 lights slid out of formation and surrounded her, moving with her descent like an escort. She grabbed her phone to record. The screen turned pure white. A single word appeared. Activated. Ahead, the underside of the dark disk seemed to open like a doorway. For one breath, she saw a tall, thin silhouette in that opening, watching her without moving. Then everything snapped back. The disk shot straight up and vanished. The 7 lights were gone. Her radio cleared. Her engine roared to life as if nothing had happened. Erin kept flying, hands shaking, with only that one word burning in her mind. Activated. Hayes Tower cleared Erin in like any normal night, but on short final she saw Tommy Greer's pickup by the terminal, headlights pulsing in perfect expanding circles, like a slow mechanical heartbeat. The tower said their cameras showed nothing unusual. She landed. By the time she shut down, Tommy's lights were steady again. Normal. Her phone wasn't. One photo saved at the exact time of the encounter. The image showed only empty sky and stars, but in the corner, a single word sat there like it had been stamped into reality. Activated. Tommy didn't laugh when she asked if he'd seen anything strange. His face tightened, like he'd been waiting for someone else to say it first. He told her he'd seen the same thing over a wheat field outside town. 7 yellow lights in a perfect circle, rotating slowly, then shooting straight up and vanishing. He drove her out there. In the field, a flawless 30-foot circle marked the ground. The wheat stubble inside wasn't crushed or burned, just bent at exact 90-degree angles into a spiraling pattern, too precise to be weather, too clean to be human. No footprints, no tracks, just geometry, as if something had pressed a symbol into the land and left without touching it. Back at the hotel, the fear turned sharper. Erin came out of the shower to find her phone awake on the bed, camera running, aimed at the window like an eye. She hadn't touched it. In the corner of the screen, the word appeared again. Activated. She tried to shut it off. It reopened. She wrapped the phone in a towel and locked it in the bathroom, but the feeling stayed. Not that she was being watched by people. That something in the sky had noticed her, marked her, and was still there. The next morning didn't feel new. It felt like the night had only changed its clothes. Erin woke before her alarm with a pressure behind her eyes. Her phone was on the pillow beside her head, even though she'd sealed it away. The time flickered. A calendar alert sat on the screen, impossible to delete. Runway 36, 7 a.m., do not be late. She tried everything: delete, power off, settings, airplane mode. The alert always returned, calm and absolute, like a command that didn't need her consent. Tommy texted her to meet at the field. The crop circle was no longer just geometry. In the pre-dawn dark, the spiral faintly glowed, each bent stalk outlined with a cold bluish light, uniform and precise like a circuit traced into nature. Erin raised her phone to film. The camera app crashed instantly. Tommy showed her his phone. A GPS route had appeared by itself, coordinates northwest of Hayes, and when he tried to remove it, it reset. 2 devices, 2 people, the same invisible hand. At Hayes, the airport looked ordinary, but Erin felt watched the way you feel it in your bones. She pre-flighted the Cessna with obsessive care. Nothing wrong, nothing touched. She lifted off at 7 a.m. on runway 36. At 500 feet, her phone chimed. A new message from no sender. Maintain heading 350. Climb to 7500. Do not deviate, she obeyed. At altitude, the prairie opened below. Clean daylight. Nowhere to hide. Dead ahead, a single yellow light hovered at her level. Steady and wrong. It didn't blink. It didn't drift. It simply existed in her path like a pinned star. More text appeared. Approach at current altitude. Maintain airspeed. Her radio thickened with static, crushing every frequency at once. The air in the cockpit felt thin, charged. The yellow light grew larger until it resolved into the underside of a disc, dark enough to seem like it absorbed sunlight. Panels and seams cut across it with geometric precision. Markings ran along the surface, too structured to be damaged, too alien to be human script. Then an opening formed beneath it. It didn't hinge or unfold. It separated, as if reality was being sliced cleanly and pulled apart. A rectangular void, perfectly sized in a way that made her stomach drop. Erin tried to pull away. The yoke resisted, not jammed, simply overridden. The plane descended with gentle certainty she didn't command. The yellow glow intensified until the cockpit looked like harsh noon. Shadows vanished, depth collapsed, sound thinned. Her phone went white. One word appeared: activated. And then, time fractured. Later she would swear it was only seconds. But the altitude didn't match. The clock didn't match. Her memory had holes with sharp edges. When the static cleared, the disk was gone. The sky was normal. The engine ran as if it had never stuttered. Her phone was back to normal too, except for a new photo in her camera roll. It was crystal clear. The underside of the disk in daylight, unmistakable. In the metadata, where location should be, there were only coordinates. Erin followed them. In the middle of farmland that should have been empty, she saw a facility that should not exist. White buildings arranged with sterile symmetry. A tall fence topped with razor wire. and at the center, a massive dish antenna angled toward the sky like an ear pressed to space. Whatever had activated her hadn't just shown itself. It had left a trail, and it was leading her somewhere on purpose. Activated didn't mean her phone, it meant her. The pattern is the point. Isolation first, then electronics go dead, then you're guided by instructions with no sender. Evidence shows up already curated, while time itself goes missing in a clean, measurable block your body can't explain. If Aaron is telling the truth, this wasn't a warning, and it wasn't an accident. It was contact done with precision. The disc, the opening, the sphere, the erased minutes, and the switch left on inside her afterward. So here's the question. If the sky spoke to you tomorrow through missing time and a single word burned into your proof, would you call it a glitch? Or would you admit it was a message? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for more sightings, missing time patterns, and the hidden signals above ordinary roads. The desert highway looked unchanged in starlight, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through nothing. Evan Strickland stood beside his truck and watched 3 lights appear over the flats, one by one, perfectly spaced, the wrong color for any aircraft. They did not blink. They held position like marks on a grid. The lights began to orbit, not around each other, around Evan and Tessa Jordan. The air thickened. A hum formed behind Evan's eyes, then in his teeth, too clean to be wind. For a moment, his boots separated from the asphalt by a few inches, as if gravity had been negotiated away. Then everything snapped back. The lights were gone. The night looked normal. Evan checked his watch and felt his stomach drop. Time had moved backward. Nevada at night can make reality feel thin. Evan was 26 when it started, and he spent 11 years carrying the same unanswered gap. He was driving in a small military convoy on State Route 375 toward a classified site near Rachel. 5 vehicles, 12 personnel, routine on paper. The only reason he never wrote it off as his own mind was Tessa Jordan. She was there too, and years later she came back with the same nightmares and the same missing minutes. The first 2 hours were pure routine. No moon, stars dense enough to look textured, the road empty, the desert flat, the horizon erased. Then the radios failed. Not interference, not fading, a clean sudden silence that did not behave like terrain. Every channel died at once. The quiet felt engineered like a hand placed over the spectrum. The convoy stopped in the same instant. Evan did not brake. The truck simply settled into a controlled halt. No brake lights ahead, no brake lights behind. 5 vehicles frozen in place. Evan looked up and saw a triangular absence sliding over the stars. Not a shadow, a shape that removed starlight. Massive, slow, silent, moving with purpose. Then the truck died completely. No dashboard glow, no engine vibration, no electronics like the world had been switched off around them. A thin beam dropped from the triangle. The color was wrong, pale with a faint blue edge that made the eyes ache. It swept the road slowly, left to right, revealing rocks and brush and cracked asphalt. But it cast no shadows. Objects looked flat, two-dimensional, like the ground had become a surface being read rather than lit. The beam stopped ahead of the convoy and held perfectly still. Evan could not measure time. His watch froze. With engines dead and radios silent, there was only breathing and the beam that behaved like something beyond physics. Then the beam retracted upward and the triangle rose, shrinking until the stars returned in their exact positions. Engines restarted on their own. Dashboards lit. Radios crackled alive. The convoy rolled forward again as if nothing had happened. At the checkpoint, Evan noticed the impossible detail. His watch was running again, but the time displayed was 13 minutes earlier than it should have been. Station clocks matched, logs matched. The timeline did not. The next morning, Evan found Tessa carrying the same hollow look. She had seen a detail he could not explain. The light behaved as if illumination and absence were separate things, moving independently. They searched for proof. Vehicle data should have shown a stop. GPS traces should have recorded a halt. Engine logs should have captured the shutdown. Instead, the records showed continuous forward motion from base to checkpoint, clean and uninterrupted, as if the convoy never paused at all. Tessa found something worse. The checkpoint perimeter cameras contained a missing block of footage exactly 13 minutes long. stamped with a generic electrical error code that did not fit the station's backup power. The gap matched the time distortion on Evan's watch with surgical precision. Evan tested the memory of others. A rear security driver who should have had the best view insisted the transport had been routine. No anomaly, no stop. The denial felt less like stubbornness and more like absence, the way starlight had been absent under the triangle. They chose silence. In their world, reporting the impossible did not trigger investigation, it triggered evaluation. The story moved into their bodies instead, becoming insomnia and fragments that arrived like broken footage, curved blue-lit walls, a smooth warm table surface that did not feel like metal, figures just outside focus, pressure in the skull that felt like questions without words. Evan left the military months later and tried to build a normal life. It cracked anyway. 10 years passed, then Tessa returned with the same nightmares and the same wrong math in the clock. Long dream hours collapsed into a few real minutes. Evan's fragments sharpened too, brief flashes of curved blue-lit walls and silhouettes that never held focus. They went back to Nevada anyway. At dusk, the desert looked harmless, almost empty on purpose. By full night, it became what Evan remembered, a place that feels like it is waiting. They parked on the shoulder near the stretch that felt right and stepped out into a silence so deep it made the blood in Evan's ears sound loud. The first light appeared above the flats, a steady point with that pale, wrong hue. A second arrived beside it, then a third, perfectly spaced. They did not blink like aircraft. They held position like markers, then began to move in a controlled orbit, circling Evan and Tessa as if measuring them. Above the road, a triangular absence slid into view and swallowed starlight. Not a shadow, not cloud, a clean geometric void that moved with intent. Under its centerline, a thin beam dropped, the same color Evan remembered from 2013, pale with a faint blue edge that hurt to stare at. The beam did not wash the desert with light. It carved a column of clarity through the darkness, and the ground inside it looked unnaturally flat, like texture without depth. The air thickened. A hum formed behind Evan's eyes, then in his teeth. Frost began to creep along the edges of Tessa's jacket despite the dry night, as if the temperature inside that corridor had been lowered independent of the world around it. Their truck died behind them without a sputter, lights off, engine silent, the dashboard blank in one clean cut. Inside the beam, figures resolved. Tall, narrow silhouettes standing where there should have been only empty desert. They did not walk in from the darkness. They appeared in positions, spaced with measured precision, facing the road as if it were a stage. Their limbs looked too long, their posture too still, and the edges of their bodies shimmered faintly as if they were not fully solid. When one of them turned its head, it did so without shifting weight, a smooth mechanical rotation that made Evan's stomach tighten. The beam held steady. The triangular void hovered low enough now that Evan could sense its scale, a silent mass pressing down on the night. The three orbiting lights tightened their circle, and Evan felt the moment his body stopped belonging to him. His boots separated from the asphalt by inches. Tessa rose beside him, rigid and weightless, her hair lifting as if underwater. The hum became a chord, layered and structured like a signal. Then everything snapped back. They dropped to the road. The beam retracted straight up, as if pulled by a reel. The void slid away, releasing the stars in perfect alignment. The truck's engine restarted on its own. Evan checked the time and felt his pulse spike. 13 minutes had inverted again, returned like a correction, as if the night had been edited and saved over. Tessa's face had changed. Not relief, recognition. A shock of memory trying to surface all at once, too large for language, leaving only tears and a tremor in her hands. Evan looked back to the desert where the figures had stood. The snowless ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no tracks, only a faint circular discoloration on the asphalt near where the beam had touched, as if heat had kissed the surface and left a subtle ring. Something had been there with them, not just lights in the sky, not just a craft, witnesses in the beam, watching closely enough to be seen, then choosing to vanish with the evidence. Route 375 doesn't feel like a random sighting. It feels like a repeatable method. Engines cut, radios muted, footage gapped, time bent, witnesses left arguing with their own clocks. If you've ever lost minutes on an empty road, if your electronics died all at once, if the sky looked like it removed the stars instead of covering them, tell me what happened. Patterns only surface when enough people compare the same impossible details. Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for more missing time cases and sightings that keep repeating where the desert is quiet enough to listen. Late Tuesday night in the West Texas oil fields, Dalton Ridgway pulled up to Pump 7, expecting nothing but the familiar chug of machinery and empty darkness. Then his electronics died, the air turned razor cold, and a perfect ring of blue-white lights appeared in total silence 50 feet away. 2 minutes later, it vanished, and Dalton realized he hadn't just seen something impossible, he had lost 9 minutes of his life. The story of Dalton Ridgway, a gritty, wary 42-year-old oil worker, unfolds in the deep, unyielding solitude of the West Texas oil fields. After 7 years navigating the endless black grid of Kalashi roads, Dalton was accustomed to the rhythmic, comforting chugging of the pump jacks. On a late Tuesday night, around 11:46 p.m., he arrived at Pump 7, killed his engine, and stepped into the profound, star-drenched darkness. That is when the anomaly appeared. 50 feet from the pump, suspended silently above a low, rusty metal giard, was a perfect ring of light. This was not scattered light. It was composed of 12 individual orbs of pale blue-white energy, arranged in a precise 20-foot diameter circle. They glowed with such controlled intensity that there was zero light spill, pure, contained energy that felt scientifically impossible. The physical effects were immediate and disorienting. A profound, unnatural cold enveloped him, sinking deeper than any West Texas winter. The air was thick with the sharp, acidic scent of ozone, the smell of a massive electrical discharge or superheated metal. Simultaneously, his electronics failed. His digital watch began to beep erratically, flashing meaningless sequences, and his phone, which moments before held a 60% charge, went completely dead. Dalton watched, frozen, as the 12 lights began a slow, synchronized, rhythmic rotation. After what Dalton estimated was just 2 minutes of paralyzed observation, the light vanished with a silent, absolute finality. When his colleague, Hector Moran, arrived at 11:56 p.m., Dalton was visibly shaken. The simple fact was undeniable. Despite his own internal clock and malfunctioning watch, which read 11:49 p.m., he had lost exactly 9 minutes of time. Furthermore, the rusty giard where the light had rested was now scorching hot to the touch, a sign of extreme, localized heat transfer. His supervisor dismissed it as St. Elmo's fire, but Dalton recognized the precision, the cold, and the blatant temporal distortion as evidence of a disciplined, purposeful presence. His exhaustion was instantly replaced by an unshakable obsession. He needed quantifiable proof. 3 weeks later, on another Tuesday night, Dalton was fully prepared. Alone at the remote Pump 12, his vehicle was outfitted with a charging pack for his phone, and his mind was tense with anticipation. At 1:09 a.m., the familiar, chilling cold descended, and the air crackled with a silent tension. This time, the formation was a perfect triangle of 3 larger, more intense blue-white lights, hovering 100 feet away. Shaking but steady, Dalton grabbed his phone and began to record, capturing 4 minutes and 17 seconds of the lights executing a complex, synchronized geometric pattern, a visual language. Suddenly, the triangle expanded, stretching its vertices outward to reveal the center, a massive, dark, physical craft. Its surface was non-reflective, appearing to absorb all ambient light, giving it a terrifying depth, like a perfect hole punched in the night sky. There were no visible rivets, seams, or conventional propulsion methods, a hallmark of true anomalous aerial vehicles, AAVs. As it descended slowly, a circular aperture opened in its underside, emitting a profound, visceral crimson light that pulsed, indicating a colossal, controlled energy source. Observing this light, Dalton experienced an acute cognitive jump, a jarring, instantaneous switch in consciousness. One moment, he was terrified and watching. The next, he was sitting back in his idling truck. The dash clock read 1:42 a.m. He had lost precisely 33 minutes of conscious awareness and memory. Scrambling out, he ran to the landing site. The metal giard was intensely hot. Below it, the ground was undeniable. The gravel had been swept away into a clean circle, and the soil beneath was vitrified, melted, fused, and cooled instantly into brittle, glassy earth, clear evidence of plasma weapon or extreme heat dissipation used by an advanced technology. Dalton resolved to keep the video a secret, acquiring the specialized EMF detector and high-end camera with Hector's help to prepare for the inevitable third act. 5 weeks after the second encounter, Dalton was back at Pump 7, his EMF detector placed strategically on his truck hood. It didn't beep, it began to scream, a loud, piercing, insistent alarm signaling the anomaly's return. Hundreds of individual blue-white lights appeared, arranging themselves in a breathtaking, ever-shifting fractal pattern before finally coalescing into a single, complex object resembling a floating building of light and shadow. This ultimate structure was entirely non-Euclidean. Its angles and geometry appeared to shift based on Dalton's perspective, consistent with descriptions of high-level, possibly interdimensional, craft. At this moment, Dalton's sensory and cognitive perception shifted. The veil lifted. He saw beyond the light to the pure energy driving it, understanding the geometry of the universe. He felt like a colorblind man suddenly granted the full electromagnetic spectrum. A single telepathic question imploded in his consciousness. Why do you observe? With his entire will, his soul's deepest impulse, Dalton responded, I want to understand. The vast floating structure dissolved, the hundreds of lights condensing rapidly into a single perfect sphere of light hovering barely 10 feet from his face. The sphere acted as a conduit, expanding his mind and filling it with compressed knowledge, a massive, silent download. He perceived the entities not as biological creatures, but as conscious energy patterns, geometric arrays of existence. They revealed themselves as the archivists, whose purpose was to meticulously record everything, every star, every atom, every thought, in a cosmic battle against entropy, the universe's eventual decay. They chose Dalton because his motivation was pure understanding, not fear or conquest. The lost time was not abduction. It was the duration required for the compressed data, an equivalent of years of research to be fully written onto his consciousness. The sphere vanished, leaving Dalton kneeling in the dirt, overwhelmed not by terror, but by the shattering, overwhelming beauty of the cosmic truth. The encounter fundamentally altered Dalton Ridgway. He kept the video footage, using it as his anchor to the truth. For a man who spent his life navigating the plains, trusting only his own reality was the foundation he had left. This quality qualified him for a truth the world would reject. 2 years later, he quit the oil fields, enrolled in community college to study physics, and eventually earned his doctorate. He became Dr. Dalton Ridgway, an astrophysicist who dedicated his life to anomalous observations and unexplained phenomena. He never spoke publicly about his nights in West Texas, but his academic career was built upon the knowledge he acquired. He published dense, technical papers on electromagnetic anomalies and complex geometric patterns, works that hinted at the profound truths he held without ever stating them outright. He established himself at the edges of the map, where accepted science broke down. And every few years he would receive an email or a letter from someone else who had seen the lights, experienced lost time, or gained a strange, inexplicable certainty. Dr. Ridgway always responded, validating their experiences, knowing that the archivists were still out there, still recording. This is the heart of the story, the moment a simple oil worker stepped past the edge of normal reality and saw the mechanism behind it, the archivists quietly recording everything while the universe slowly decays. But here's what matters to us. If ordinary people like Dalton can be chosen, then what is it about your life, your attention, your curiosity, your need to understand that could make you a candidate too? And if any of this feels strangely familiar, don't scroll past. Drop a comment and keep it simple. Tell me where you are, what you experienced, whether your electronics failed like a battery drain or a signal drop, or your clock jumped, and what you felt in your body, cold, numbness, dizziness, ringing in your ears, anything. Every week I'm going to pick the most specific reports, compare the overlaps, and start building a real hotspot map from the patterns. If you want to be part of the group that tracks the real signs, hit subscribe. Don't just watch, document. From Argentina to New Mexico to Oregon, the mutilations spread with chilling consistency. Hollowed bodies, precise excisions, untouched landscapes. The same intelligence, the same precision, the same eerie signature appeared again and again. Something was studying Earth, and we could only wonder why. Reports of livestock mutilations have appeared across the globe, from Argentina to New Mexico. Animals found drained of blood, organs missing, and bodies untouched by scavengers. Each case shared the same eerie precision, leaving no explanation that fit earthly predators. In 2024, Oregon became the epicenter of this unexplained phenomenon. Ranchers discovered herds hollowed and dissected with perfect accuracy, pastures left undisturbed. Witnesses described glowing orange spheres rising silently from the ground, splitting in two, and vanishing within seconds. Shadowy forms were seen moving near the livestock, then disappearing as if the night itself swallowed them. The surge drew ufologists, scientists, and authorities, all captivated by a pattern too deliberate to ignore. Intelligence, stealth, and technology beyond human understanding were at work. The question remained, who or what was behind these operations, and why was Oregon the stage for this unfolding mystery? In the darkness, the creatures emerged, tall and spindly, their skin a pale, metallic gray that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Oversized, amber-like eyes glowed with an unearthly intelligence, and their long, jointed limbs moved with a sinuous, almost liquid grace. They glided across the field silently, approaching the unsuspecting livestock with precision that defied natural explanation. Each animal froze, locked in place by an invisible field that rippled softly through the air, muscles rigid yet perfectly relaxed, eyes wide but calm. Not a single hoof shuffled, not a blade of grass bent under their passage. From their elongated arms, intricate tools extended, devices that seemed almost alive, capable of merging seamlessly with the veins and arteries of the immobilized animals. The blood was drawn methodically, siphoned from the body with a precision that left not a trace. No ruptured vessels, no coagulated residue, not even a single stray cell. The creatures worked quickly and silently, harvesting the life force with a mechanical rhythm, as though each extraction followed a pre-programmed protocol. Surrounding tissues remained untouched, organs unscathed, the animals' forms eerily intact, apart from the emptiness within. Once the harvest was complete, the instruments retracted as effortlessly as they appeared. The creatures lingered for a moment, surveying the still, silent field, then melted back into the shadows, their elongated forms vanishing between the hills. The livestock lay exactly where they had been taken, hollowed and unspoiled, an uncanny testament to the precision of the operation. The fields were left in perfect calm, devoid of footprints or drag marks, as if the event had been nothing more than a whisper in the night. Silence and emptiness remained, the only evidence of beings whose technology and intent far exceeded anything of this world. The creatures crouched beside their victims, their elongated limbs bending in impossible angles. Pale gray skin stretched taut over thin, sinewy bodies, while their large amber eyes scanned the animal with clinical focus. One limb extended, revealing a tool that gleamed faintly, almost organic in design. It pressed gently against the surface of the skin, peeling it back like the cover of a book, exposing the soft tissue beneath. Their selections were meticulous. Eyes, ears, lips, and tongue were removed with an eerie consistency, every cut clean and precise, as if guided by an invisible map. Reproductive organs disappeared entirely, excised without damaging surrounding tissues. The process suggested purpose beyond simple predation, biological sampling perhaps for genetic study, or examination of reproductive and soft tissue structures unknown to human science. Each movement was deliberate, economical, and silent. The animals remained immobilized, their bodies perfectly still as the aliens harvested what they needed. The most disturbing aspect was the drilling and suction method. A tiny circular opening appeared in the upper jaw, extending directly into the brain and ocular cavity. The creature's instruments drew the tissues through with impossibly delicate precision. The eyes and brain matter vanished into a slender tube that seemed to absorb without tearing. Surrounding structures were untouched. The technique implied a level of bioengineering and tool design far beyond human capability. Each procedure was executed quickly, without error, leaving the animal intact except for the removed organs. A clean surgical extraction performed as though the animal were simply a living specimen in a laboratory. Every detail suggested preparation, study, and purpose. The creatures did not act randomly. They moved like researchers conducting repeated experiments, recording data through each removal. Precision was paramount, stealth essential. Their actions left no traditional trace of violence, yet the results were unmistakable. The animals were altered, hollowed, and cataloged in a way that defied any earthly explanation. After the extraction, the creatures engaged in their final stage, relocation and environmental control. Under the cover of night, they lifted the animals with silent strength, returning them to the exact locations from which they had been taken. The fields remained pristine. No drag marks, no footprints, no evidence of transportation betrayed the scene. Their observation of the terrain extended over weeks or months, as hovering orbs and silent crafts scouted the area, selecting the next target with care and precision. Even more unsettling was the repulsion effect left behind. Carcasses remained untouched by scavengers, predators, or insects for weeks, sometimes months. Wolves, coyotes, vultures, and even smaller insects avoided the bodies entirely. Some fields showed no disturbance at all, as if the very life around the corpse recoiled. The aliens appeared to exert a subtle, unseen control, whether through chemical treatment, electromagnetic influence, or energy fields that made the corpses biologically hazardous or repellent. These measures reinforced both stealth and danger. Any human or animal interference was prevented, preserving the integrity of the samples and ensuring no contamination. The combination of perfect placement, environmental manipulation, and biological isolation turned each site into a sealed laboratory of their design. The creatures moved with calculated intelligence, leaving behind landscapes that were unnervingly silent, meticulously arranged, and utterly alien. The evidence left in the wake of these events forms an undeniable pattern. Blood drained completely from the animals, precise surgical excisions removed eyes, ears, lips, tongues, and reproductive organs, and the scenes were manipulated with such perfection that not a footprint or drag mark betrayed the operation. Each method points to intelligence and technology far beyond any earthly predator, confirming that these acts could not have been carried out by natural forces. Human hands might replicate some aspects in theory, yet the speed, accuracy, and flawless execution suggest a presence entirely alien. The motives behind such operations remain speculative but chilling. The harvesting of biological material hints at systematic experimentation, an ongoing study of Earth's living organisms. Genetic analysis, reproductive sampling, or unknown physiological research may be the purpose, yet the full scope of intent remains hidden. Some have even proposed theological interpretations: fallen angels, demonic entities, or extraterrestrial beings enacting designs beyond human understanding. The deliberate, methodical nature of the acts leaves no room for randomness. Every movement is calculated, every sample collected with intent. A single haunting question persists. Why are these occurrences concentrated almost exclusively in the United States, leaving the rest of the world untouched? The selective geography adds another layer of mystery, suggesting observation, planning, and a purpose linked to location. For those who witness or investigate these events, the implications are profound. Humanity may be observing an extraterrestrial program unfolding in plain sight, a silent experiment against which we are powerless to intervene. Each hollowed carcass and untouched pasture becomes a call to examine the unknown, to investigate beyond the confines of our planet, and to confront the unsettling reality that we are not alone and perhaps have never been. If this mystery captivates you, leave a comment with your theories and experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the unexplained and the extraterrestrial. In the quiet, rural corners of America, an untold horror unfolds under the veil of night. It's a recurring nightmare that has haunted farmers for over 50 years, a mystery where the victims are livestock and the perpetrator defies human logic. This is not the work of wolves or coyotes. This is calculated, precise, and utterly bloodless. They call them cattle mutilations. For decades, investigators have been chasing ghosts, yet the evidence points increasingly toward a non-terrestrial solution. Tonight, we peel back the layers of this gruesome enigma, from the unnerving surgical precision to the alarming forensic evidence that suggests we are dealing with a technology far beyond our own, exploring the terrifying possibility that these mutilations are not random acts of cruelty, but part of a global, non-hostile alien agenda. The typical mutilation scene is a study in contradictions. A lifeless animal, often a cow, found intact, yet vital organs have been expertly removed. The cases cluster in areas known for high UFO activity, like the vast San Luis Valley in Colorado. Ranchers like Mike Duran, who discovered one of his cows with the udders and female genitalia cleanly removed, consistently testify that the acts are unlike any natural predator kill. The most chilling aspects of these scenes are universal. Organs like the genitals, eyes, tongues, and ears are surgically removed with uncanny finesse. The animal's blood is entirely drained, yet there is no blood at the crime scene. Crucially, there is a complete absence of evidence. No human footprints, no tire tracks, no signs of struggle, implying the animals were never even on the ground during the procedure. The cuts themselves are the most damning clue. Duran described them as not being made by a knife, but looking like they were cut and cauterized at the same time, clean, like a laser. The sophistication of these cuts is what first broke the earthly paradigm. They are performed with such cellular precision that tissues immediately adjacent to the cut line show no trauma whatsoever, a feat impossible with current human surgical tools, which always leave microscopic cell tearing. This technological signature, coupled with the mysterious nature of the attack, often leads the ranchers themselves to an extraterrestrial conclusion. As Duran stated, upon seeing the scene, his first thought was, "They're back." This initial visceral reaction of the witnesses strongly suggests that the level of precision and the manner of the operation are entirely foreign to our world, hinting at a non-human operative utilizing methods we can only dream of. The mystery transitioned from folklore to forensic science, with the work of individuals like Philip Hoyle, former director of the Animal Pathology Research Unit in the UK. Hoyle spent years investigating these cases, and his findings are arguably the most compelling link to an extraterrestrial hypothesis. He stressed that when examining the wounds under a microscope, one realizes they are not looking at a mere knife wound. Some of the tissue appeared to be unzipped, implying a molecular-level disintegration rather than a cut. The cuts were clean, precise, clinical, and perfectly aligned. He unequivocally stated that the technology used is frankly terrifying and clearly, absolutely clearly, more advanced than anything we currently possess on Earth, suggesting a civilization thousands of years ahead of us. The most shocking evidence came from a substance often found at the wound site, a black, putty-like paste. Analysis revealed this to be degraded hemoglobin, but with a crucial distinction. The red and white corpuscles had been separated using a centrifuge. Hoyle emphasized that this sophisticated process can only be done in a high-tech, controlled laboratory setting. The fact that this specific forensic signature is found on a cow carcass in a remote field utterly invalidates any theory involving earthbound predators or cultists. This finding points directly to a high-level, technologically advanced scientific operation, a kind of biosignature left by the craft's internal environment or procedures. Based on the combination of the sterile cuts and the lack of ground evidence, Hoyle developed a chilling theory about the perpetrator's method of operation. He hypothesized that the entities are using transference beams, essentially anti-gravity beams, to silently levitate the animal off the ground and on board the craft where the surgical procedure is done, before placing it back down. This zero-friction transport system is deemed the only rational explanation for the complete lack of evidence or disturbance surrounding the animal when it is discovered. This hypothesis is further corroborated by hundreds of farmer testimonies reporting strange phenomena coinciding with the mutilations. Bright spheres of light, orbs, and UFOs operating in non-traditional, non-aerodynamic flight patterns, exhibiting speeds and instantaneous directional changes unlike any known human aircraft or helicopter. These sightings are often described as silent, hovering craft operating with a purposeful, stealthy efficiency. If the evidence points to superior technology, the question then becomes why. Hoyle believes the objective is not malevolent, but rather a global surveillance program. He suggests that various alien intelligences have a vested interest in planet Earth and humanity, and they are systematically sampling the environment by removing specific, regenerative tissues and glands from livestock on a global scale. Their primary goal is to monitor the food chain and the environment by collecting genetic materials and tissues, which are then transported off-world for their ultimate purpose, perhaps to monitor the effects of our pollution or disease on Earth's delicate biological systems. Hoyle argues that these entities are not hostile. They genuinely care about our welfare. He views their actions as a meticulous global stewardship of the biosphere, operating in secret to prevent mass panic, because revealing the full extent of this intervention would undoubtedly cause societal collapse. The most curious element of the cattle mutilation phenomenon is not the technology, but its apparent decline in recent years. While high-profile, undeniable cases still surface sporadically, the sheer volume and geographical concentration seen in the 1970s and 1980s have largely diminished. If these acts were the result of a global, systematic extraterrestrial program, why the sudden lull? One major hypothesis within the UFO and mutilation research community, and one that aligns with Philip Hoyle's theory, is that the sampling mission has largely been completed. If the objective was to gather sufficient genetic and tissue samples from the global food chain to establish a baseline of planetary health and monitor the effects of human environmental impact, pollution, pesticides, disease, then the entities may have simply collected enough data. The operation moved from a high-volume data collection phase to a low-volume maintenance or monitoring phase. Essentially, once the initial biological census was complete, the need for dozens of mutilations per year vanished. Furthermore, the decrease might reflect a shift in the alleged alien agenda. If the animal sampling was preparatory to the human breeding program detailed by David Jacobs, perhaps the resources and focus have been redirected entirely. Once the necessary environmental data was correlated with the accelerating human hybridization program, the entities may have pivoted their surveillance efforts away from the fields and more directly towards human abductions and the quiet integration of hybrids into society. The animals provided the necessary biological context. The humans now provide the necessary genetic material and host environment. Therefore, the recent decline in cattle mutilations may not be evidence that the phenomenon was fake, but rather chilling proof that the entities involved are efficient, goal-oriented, and highly successful. They accomplished their mission, gathered their required materials, and have now moved silently onto the next, perhaps far more invasive phase of their complex operation on Earth. The lack of new evidence doesn't signify peace. It might simply mean the surveillance has become so sophisticated and so targeted that we are no longer equipped to detect it. The evidence is complex, frightening, and undeniable. Now we turn the question to you. Do you believe the mutilations are proof of an ongoing alien agenda, or is there a terrestrial explanation we haven't uncovered? Let us know your theories in the comments below. Your speculation and analysis fuel the search for truth. If you found this investigation compelling, please hit the like button, share this video with fellow truth seekers, and most importantly, subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Don't let the mystery go unsolved. Some disappear without leaving footprints. Others disappear by being deleted. On a clear Nevada morning, Mara Lewis watched a column of white light stab straight through the sky like a spear pinned to the earth. 34 minutes later, her aircraft data said she had not moved at all. 4 days after that, her flight coordinator, Victor Hale, was gone. Not missing, not dead, erased. Mara Lewis was 32, former Air Force, now flying contract environmental surveys along restricted edges of Nevada's test corridors. She trusted instruments the way other people trusted instinct. She trusted airspeed, fuel flow, heading, and the calm repetition of routes that never changed. Victor Hale was the ground link. He watched her telemetry, marked her waypoints, kept her on schedule, and kept her safe by being the voice that always answered. On August 14th, the sky gave Mara something that did not belong to weather or training or any human chart. At 6:45 over waypoint Alpha, the desert looked ordinary from above. Pale ridges, Dry washes, scattered scrub, the kind of landscape that hides secrets simply by being too empty to question. Then the column appeared, a vertical shaft of white light, impossibly clean, rising from the ground and continuing upward past cloud height, past blue, as if it did not stop at atmosphere at all. It did not bloom or flare like lightning. It did not diffuse like sun glare. It was precise, like geometry forced into the sky. Mara banked to confirm it was real, and the light did not shift the way a reflection would. It remained anchored to a point in the desert like a nail through a map. As she closed the distance, the ground beneath it resolved into a perfect circle, a burn scar too symmetrical to be a wildfire. About 300 feet across, scorched into a crisp boundary, as if the sand had been branded by a massive seal. The surface inside the ring looked fused, darker and glassy in places. Even from altitude, it read as heat that had been controlled, not heat that had spread. Her instruments still looked normal for a few more seconds, as if the aircraft itself was debating whether to believe what her eyes were seeing. Then the first failure hit. The radio did not degrade into static. It simply stopped, like sound had been switched off. The radar blanked. The navigation display blinked once, then steadied on a frozen value that refused to update. Mara tried to turn away, a simple retreat that should have been automatic. The controls resisted, not like a jam, not like a mechanical failure, like an invisible hand had decided her heading for her. At the boundary of the light, the world began to misbehave. The air outside the windshield seemed thicker, not with weather, but with geometry. Her altimeter held, her engine held, and yet the horizon no longer shifted the way it should. It felt like the sky had been pinned in place. Then she saw them. Not reflections, not clouds. Aircraft. Dozens of them, suspended at different angles around the column like objects embedded in clear resin. A B-52 hung nose up, frozen mid-climb. A military helicopter sat tilted as if caught in a sudden gust that never finished happening. Older silhouettes hovered beside newer ones, all locked in the same impossible stillness. No contrails, no rotor blur, no motion at all. Mara's stomach dropped as the realization landed. This was not a beam in the sky. It was a trap that could hold time. She pulled the yoke and felt the response vanish. The controls did not jam mechanically. They simply stopped belonging to her. The Cessna continued forward with gentle certainty, as if guided on rails, slipping toward the center of the column. In the brief seconds before the light swallowed the cockpit, her instruments began to lie. Numbers flickered into values that could not coexist. Heading and speed remained calm while the world outside looked closer and farther at the same time. Her phone screen flashed once, not with an app, but with a blank brightness that felt like an eye-opening. And in that tightening space, Mara understood one thing with brutal clarity. Whatever held those aircraft was aware of her arrival, and it was making room. Mara never felt the aircraft enter the column. There was no jolt, no turbulence, no sense of crossing a boundary. One moment she was watching the white shaft carve the sky. The next, the cockpit was inside a brightness that didn't behave like light. It didn't illuminate, it replaced. Shadows didn't fade, they stopped existing. Sound thinned into a muffled layer. The engine vibration became distant, like a memory of motion instead of motion itself. Outside the windows was a pale emptiness threaded with faint grid lines as if the air had been printed. The suspended aircraft were closer now, and worse. Not just frozen, but collected. A B-52 hung at an angle that should have ended in catastrophe, yet it stayed pinned. A military helicopter sat motionless with rotor blades locked mid-sweep. Older silhouettes hovered too. Airframes that belonged to decades Mara knew only from manuals. They weren't floating, they were archived. Her instruments tried to argue. The GPS string kept reordering itself. The clock flickered through impossible timestamps. A warning tone repeated too steadily to be random, too clean to be failure. Then something noticed her. Not a figure, not a voice. A tension, vast and ancient, pressing against the inside of her skull like deep water. Memories opened with surgical precision. Childhood, training, the first solo, stall recovery, the smell of fuel on hot tarmac, Victor Hale's face in the control room. Each moment surfaced, turned, inspected. The pain wasn't physical. It was cognitive. Her identity tightened into a shape that could be measured. The harder she resisted, the more she sensed resistance itself being logged. A final impression branded itself into her mind. The column wasn't a beam. It was a corridor of light with faint circuitry like striations, bending where geometry shouldn't bend. The frozen aircraft weren't accidents. They were samples, held at the edge of time for as long as the intelligence chose. Then the pressure released. Mara blinked and the cockpit snapped back into ordinary physics. Blue sky, normal glare, familiar engine hum. Her hands were already locked on the yoke, knuckles white. The panel read green across the board, calm and indifferent. The logs were worse than her nerves. Flight data showed no forward movement for 34 minutes. No drift, no turn. A perfect hold at altitude, as if the plane had been pinned to a point in space. Engine parameters stayed normal the whole time. It was recorded like routine, like time had paused her and restarted without leaving fingerprints. Back on the ground, she went straight to Victor Hale. Someone had to confirm her track. Someone had to say they'd seen the gap. Instead, she found a blank space where Victor should have been. Not an empty chair. Gone. His desk didn't exist. The schedule board had no name in his slot. The staff list skipped cleanly from one coordinator to the next with no gap, no correction marks, no hint a line had been removed. Mara searched emails, flight plans, sign-offs, duty logs. The system returned nothing, not even an error. It was as if the database didn't recognize the letters in his name, and the people around her didn't react like someone had vanished. They reacted like she'd asked about a person who never worked there. Confusion, mild impatience, polite correction. Mara watched their faces and felt something colder than fear settle in her chest. This wasn't denial. It was absence engineered so completely it had rewritten the room. Only Mara still remembered Victor. That was the real proof the column wasn't just an anomaly in the sky. It could freeze machines like insects in amber. It could stop a plane without leaving a trace. And it could erase a man so thoroughly that even bureaucracy forgot how to say his name. Mara left the station with her flight log in hand and a single certainty sharpening into place. The column had let her go, but hadn't let Victor Hale. Mara didn't go public. She checked the data first. 34 minutes missing. Then Victor Hale was erased. No files, no emails, no one who truly remembered him. That was the real message. The column didn't just freeze aircraft. It could delete people. 6 months later, one text slipped through, VH. 2 letters saying he still existed somewhere, time couldn't reach. If reality can erase a person, the only defense is to make the story too widespread to erase. What would you do if someone vanished and everyone swore they never existed? Drop your theories in the comments. Subscribe for more.